Hello, dear colleagues. My name is Reverend Connie Simon. I am a fat, brown-skinned woman with very short, graying natural hair. I'm wearing black glasses, a jewel-toned flowered top, and dangly earrings. I use she, her pronouns. In my new role as scribe, it is my honor to convene the 204th Ministerial Conference in Berry Street. Please join me as we light our chalice, the chosen symbol of our faith. If you have a personal chalice where you are, I invite you to light it too. From far and wide we gather again, across the miles and across the ages, called by love and connected by faith. May the light of our chalice draw us closer through time and space, one to another, in collegiality, friendship, and love. It is good to be together. Let's get started. This is my first year as scribe of the Berry Street Conference, and even though I was chosen a couple of months ago, it still hasn't sunk in yet. I am an avid student of our Unitarian Universalist and Unitarian Universalist history. To think that I serve in a role first held by Henry Ware Jr. is humbling. In a timeline almost as old as the United States itself, we've had about as many U.S. presidents as we've had scribes. Most of them have been white men and a few have been white women. Until now, none of them has been a black person, let alone a black woman. In my short ministerial lifetime, I've known only one Berry Street essay scribe, Reverend Dr. Kate Walker. Each year, I witnessed her wit, thoughtfulness, and the ease with which she convened our gatherings. Her grasp of the history of the Berry Street essay and the strength, tenderness, faithfulness, and humor she brought to her role amazed me. She shepherded the Berry Street essay through the pandemic and published The Through Line, 200 Years of the Berry Street Essay. I am and will be eternally grateful for her generosity with her time and knowledge as I assume this role. Kate, we, your colleagues and friends, thank you for your service. Through the living tradition of this faith and of this conference, we have been called not just to name, but to wrestle and engage with the issues of our times. In 204 years, the Berry Street essay has addressed spirituality, faith, religious authority, and revelation. It has questioned the relevance of church, the interplay of religion and reason, and the meaning of beloved community. It has addressed racial justice, clergy misconduct, and war. Many of the essays have been thought-provoking and daring. This should not be surprising. As our colleague John White Chadwick wrote in 1884, why is this faith of ours a daring faith? For one thing, because it is a faith in religion. And there can be no faith in religion at this present time which does not involve an element of daring. Those words are as true today as they were in 1884. In times such as these, in a world marred by political divisiveness, poverty, war, hatred, and continued harm to our planet, it is more important than ever that we remain daring in our faith. There is much to be learned from our history and tradition. There is much to help us move forward and transform ourselves and our world as long as we are willing to engage with it openly and honestly, owning and understanding the good, the not so good, and even the harmful parts of our past. As the scribe of the Berry Street essay, I promise to do my best to uphold, but not be beholden to, our tradition, and to support the Berry Street Essay Executive Committee in the selection and presentation of inspiring and thought-provoking essays. There would be no Berry Street essay without the executive committee. In their deliberations, they considered dozens of themes and possible essayists, and drawing upon their wide knowledge of our faith and the issues of the day, managed to select just the person we need to hear that year. I will speak about the other members of the committee a bit later, but for now I want to highlight one particular member, the Reverend Dr. Morrison Reed, who, along with Reverend Nicole Kirk, is responsible for planting the seeds of my deep interest in the history of our faith. I have been profoundly influenced by Mark as a writer, professor, and minister, and have been inspired by his grace, kindness, and wisdom. He told me and showed me that we Black UUs have always been here, a lesson that cemented my grounding in this faith. I am proud to call him my sibling and my colleague. Mark graciously accepted a one-year appointment to the executive committee following the passing of Jose Ballester. We thank you for your service to Unitarian Universalism and on the Berry Street Essay Executive Committee. It is another of our traditions for the outgoing member of the executive committee to offer our prayer. And so, please welcome the Reverend Dr. Mark Morrison Reed.
In the stillness of this moment, before the release of the next breath, in the pause between heartbeats, before thought once again tramples over intuition, let us sense thy presence, you who dwells within and moves among us along the web of interdependence. You who lovingly but firmly binds us to each other and into this beloved community in which we live out our values, live up to our heritage, and redeem its failings. Divine One, we gather before you as we are with wounds and hopes. We gather as a community of faith honoring a courageous and flawed past, as we seek strength and comfort in collegiality. Our courageous past is the manifestation of a truth. Love in action seeks justice and celebrates difference. But in this moment, as we prepare to receive the words and rhythms, the wisdom and heart of our dear colleague and sister Kim Crawford Harvie, let us set aside the chatter in our minds that keeps us from being here in this moment. Set aside the tendency to analyze and critique which prevents us from listening deeply. Put to rest concerns about our congregations, the UUA, and our ministries. Just be here now. Feel your next breath. Notice your next heartbeat. Sense the ineffable that binds us together. Open yourself to the gift we are about to receive. Amen, and blessed be.
In what my predecessor called an arcane and odd ritual that was beyond her understanding, those assembled for the essay invite a nomination from the floor for a moderator. This all-virtual gathering is one of those times when it's not possible to follow tradition. As Kate reminded us in 2020, tradition is meant to guide us, not restrict us. And so we asked our essayist to nominate someone to introduce her. I invite Reverend Marni Harmony to the virtual podium to serve as our moderator and introduce our 2024 speaker.
My name is Marni Harmony, and I'm a happily retired UU minister living in Winter Park, Florida, celebrating the 50th anniversary of my ordination and having traveled with Kim all these years. 51 years ago, I was the student minister at First Parish, Concord, before the days of internships, where Kim was an adorable little 13-year-old dyke. We met at the church leadership retreat And that is how it started. We actually didn't meet again until Kim was on her way to ministry, and we met at GA. And from then on, well, it's just been love. 35 years ago, Arlington Street Church, where I had also served as a student minister, invited Kim, a young and relatively new minister, into that historic pulpit. 35 years. 35 years of collaborating and creating ministry in the same congregation. And I thought 20 years was pretty cool. Kim and her beloved wife, Kim, raised 3 daughters, 2 adopted from Peru, and for the past 16 years have lived at Concord Academy, where Kim teaches math, and both serve as house parents for 30 exuberant teenagers. Understandably, their idea of heaven is the silence found backpacking in the depths of the Grand Canyon. Kim has a heart as wide as the universe and seemingly endless energy. She has assured me she sleeps, but when she sends texts at 2 a.m., I have to wonder. What I do know is that she has repeatedly found ways to live into the great mysteries with wonder and joy and always possibilities for love and transformation. Take a deep breath and get ready for the journey.
I have a group of friends who have held each other's mysteries for many years. Reverend Jan Richardson is speaking. We have held the joyful mysteries, the unimaginably sorrowful mysteries, the complicated mysteries. We have held the mysteries that have shattered us. We have waited together, wept and rejoiced together, offered and received blessing. We have helped carry each other across thresholds into lives we could hardly have envisioned. This engagement with mystery is good ministry. Sometimes the work is joyful. Sometimes we celebrate. Sometimes the work is lonely. Will no one stay awake with me? By times we are fearful, we abide, we mourn. And sometimes the not knowing really gets to us. Do you know this E. Cummings poem? No time ago, or else a life, walking in the dark, I met Christ, Jesus, my heart flopped over and lay still while he passed as close as I'm to you, yes, closer, made of nothing except loneliness. I'm not talking about faith or faithlessness. I'm not talking about believing or not believing in a God or gods. I want to talk about our refusal of cheap certainty. I love that about us. I want to talk about making ourselves at home with the unknowable, about facing mystery head on, about the willingness to live in the presence of mystery and to know it as a worthy companion, even to try to love it. This is not for the faint of heart. Rumi said, sell your cleverness and buy bewilderment. We are called to the good work of building, holding, and upholding beloved spiritual community, to raise the questions but not to answer them, to love the questions, as Rilke said, and the point is to live everything, live the questions, whether or not we live into the answers. I'm thinking of that Sidney Harris cartoon of 2 scientists at a blackboard, which is covered with numbers and symbols on both the right and the left. And in the middle, in between the 2 sets of equations, it says, then a miracle occurs. And pointing to that, one scientist is saying to the other, I think you should be more explicit here. Here goes. I'm standing with musician Pete Donnelly as we prepare to process for the installation of our own Reverend Kate in the Provincetown pulpit. Pete is in the spin cycle of difficult days. I share my faith with him that when one door closes, another door opens. Without missing a beat, Pete intones, yeah, but it's hell in the hallway. Oh, that hell of in-between, of fear, grief, anger, all those unwelcome guests that come knocking in the night. Most of us would prefer not to answer the door, pretending we're not home. But sometimes they just barge in, don't they? They tromp in, stomping their muddy boots, toss their stuff everywhere, stand in the open refrigerator door, eating us out of house and home. They eviscerate us. And then they're gone. And maybe, just maybe, they leave a gift. Many years ago, my friend Victoria and I were visiting El Santuario de Chimayo, the Lords of New Mexico, when a tiny ancient woman dressed entirely in black walked into church. Victoria, who knows these things, said, she's a holy person. We followed her into the tiny room where tourists filled Tupperware with holy dirt from a hole in the floor. The woman did not stoop down for dirt. She merely stood, motionless, with her eyes closed, presumably in prayer. We too closed our eyes and prayed. When I opened my eyes, I found her gazing intently at me with clear, dark eyes set in a wrinkled face. May you be well, she said in Spanish. Peace be with you. Victoria was ecstatic. She gave you a blessing, she said. The next afternoon, the bottom of Frijoles Canyon was shimmering under the August desert sun. Horsing around with two teenage boys, I stood on a huge boulder and swung out over a waterfall on a deceptively thick green branch. There had been a drought. At the top of the arc, as I hung suspended over the falls, the branch snapped and I fell. This is what I saw as I somersaulted over and over and over. White water, black rocks, red canyon walls, green trees, blue sky, water, rock, walls, trees, sky. I was absolutely certain that I was about to die. And this is what I thought. My last glimpse of the earth. So beautiful. I landed hard, somehow seated upright in the icy water of the shallow pool at the bottom, somehow alive. My left arm was shattered, and I was gobsmacked, streaming with gratitude and drunk with awe at the vivid, pulsing beauty of the Eden of the canyon. Walking up and out, I was delirious with joy for another chance to wake up on this beautiful earth. The feeling has never left me. Carlos Castaneda's Yaqui shaman, Don Juan, recommended taking death as an advisor. He said, death is our eternal companion. It is always to our left at an arm's length. It has always been watching you. It always will. The thing to do when you're impatient is to turn to your left and ask advice from your death. An immense amount of pettiness is dropped if your death makes a gesture to you, or if you catch a glimpse of it, or if you just catch that feeling that your companion is there, watching you. Mystery loves company. This is an invitation to the willingness to let the unknown be unknowable. I don't want to poke at it as if it were a sleeping beast or worry it like a bad tooth. It is not malevolent, nor is it benevolent. It just is. I want to honor the power and presence of mystery, our constant and worthy companion. I was maybe 8 or 9 years old when I first heard the Beatles sing Eleanor Rigby. Her loneliness haunted me. In Paul McCartney's 2-volume collection of essays about his songs, I was greatly relieved to read that Eleanor Rigby was a composite old lady and Paul made up the rest, including Father Mackenzie. St. Peter's Church and its graveyard are real, though, and the site of the fateful meeting of Paul McCartney and John Lennon. Paul was 15, John was 16. A mutual friend who they both knew they were both obsessed with rock and roll introduced them at a festival. In 2 weeks' time, they were playing music together and sharing songs. Paul writes, I do often stop and wonder about the chances of the Beatles getting together. We were 4 guys who lived in the city in the north of England, but we didn't know one another. Then, by chance, we did get to know one another. And then, when we played together, we sounded pretty good. To this very day, he says, it is still a complete mystery to me that it happened at all. I'd seen John around in the chip shop on the bus and thought he looked quite cool, but would we have ever talked? Would John and I have met some other way if our friend hadn't gone to that festival? I'd actually gone to try to pick up a girl. All these small coincidences had to happen to make the Beatles happen, and it does feel like some kind of magic. It's one of the wonderful lessons about saying yes. When life presents you these opportunities, you never know where they might lead. I have a friend of some considerable means who has made several significant anonymous contributions to Arlington Street's work in the city. I invited him to attend the service sometime, just wanting him to experience it. And sure enough, one Sunday morning, he walked in, accompanied by a young friend, and slid into a pew toward the front. I was so happy and really excited to show us off. Just then, a bedraggled and obviously inebriated guest careened into the sanctuary and came pitching down the center aisle. Arlington Street Sanctuary seats more than 900. But somehow, he stumbled into, yes, the pew where our benefactor and his guest were seated. As the service got underway, he fell asleep and slept loudly. But then something woke him up and apparently surprised him to find himself in church. He staggered back out the way he had come. Later in the afternoon, I called my friend to apologize. Not the call I had wanted to make. He stopped me. Kim, he said, you know I'm sober. That kid with me this morning, when we got to church, he'd been clean for less than 24 hours. Yesterday, he didn't look so different from that poor guy sitting next to him this morning. So afterwards, he told me that at some point, he turned and looked to his right and saw his past. And then he looked at me, and he saw his future. He got it. He got that he has a chance. Pretty graphic, right? Nothing subtle about that. Kim, church was a total win. Why do I ever think I'm in control of anything? And really, are there any coincidences? When I told this story to a rabbi, he said it was Elijah who came and left before anyone knew. Mother Teresa spoke of Christ in all his distressing disguises. In early December, one of my oldest and closest friends went in for a routine mammogram and was diagnosed with breast cancer. Less than a week later, she went in for a regularly scheduled colonoscopy and was diagnosed with colon cancer. One day, she appeared completely healthy. 3 weeks and 2 surgeries later, she awoke in the swirling chaos of pain and pills and prayer. I sat with her, as we do, and sitting with the mystery of these uninvited guests did not sit well with me. I could feel my resistance rising, feel the fight coming on. She was far more spacious than I. To begin, she asked the question of questions. We would do well to tape it up on the bathroom mirror or maybe have it tattooed on our forearm, not, why is this happening to me? But why is this happening for me? Why is this happening for me? And then she got curious. Not, I'm going to Google the living daylights out of this, but what is the gift? And answers began to surface. I'm not very good at asking for help, she said, an award-winning understatement. Suddenly, she had no choice. And as family and friends, church and neighbors rallied to her care, she experienced herself surrounded by affection and tenderness. Full of wonder, she told me, there is an ocean of love. Answers began to surface and many questions remained, and somewhere along the way, mystery became mystery, capital M, mystery, a companion on the journey of her illness to healing and wellness, both terrifying and awe-inspiring. One thing became crystal clear. Once you're all in for mystery, you are all in for living wide awake. Lao Tzu wrote, "From wonder into wonder, existence opens." Those of you who were raised Catholic are undoubtedly far more familiar than I with the 20 mysteries of the Rosary, moments or events in the lives of Jesus and Mary, divided into 4 categories of capital M mysteries, plural, the joyful mysteries, the luminous mysteries, the sorrowful mysteries, and the glorious mysteries. Anna Mary Ward, a devout Catholic and mother of my friend Mike and his 6 siblings, had the same answer for every theological question her children asked. It's a mystery. Anna Mary believed in a lot of things I don't, but our explanation for why she did and I don't all meet in that theological intersection. It's a mystery. Rumi again. Out beyond ideas of right doing and wrongdoing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. Unitarian Universalism is my greatest religious influence, onward and upward forever. But like most, if not all of us, there are others. I learned to swim in Thoreau's Walden Pond, diving in, immersing myself in the fresh, deep waters of transcendentalism. I loved its seat, its throne in nature, the embodied way it exalts the senses and emotion, its embrace of the transparent eyeball and the different drummer. Transcendentalism's main apologist, Ralph Waldo Emerson, lived a life marked by tragedy. He was just shy of 8 years old when his father died. His brother went insane. His first wife died not even 2 years into their marriage. His firstborn son died at the age of 5. Emerson spoke of the thin porridge or cold tea of genteel Bostonians. Unitarian theology and ritual, he wrote, was corpse cold. He knew firsthand that reason and logic are poor tools in the face of suffering. This made total sense to me from the time I was very young. When I was 20, living in Japan, I landed, seated again, in a Zen Buddhist monastery. The giant container of silence and ritual both held me and freed me. I layered them onto the Unitarianism and Transcendentalism of my childhood, cobbling together my faith and my ministry. Zen's relationship to mystery has a name: don't know mind. The spiritual practice is to counter the strong pull to know with don't know. Japanese culture is infused with don't know mind. One of its cardinal aesthetics is yugen, which translates as ineffable, something beyond language, though not an allusion beyond to anything, beyond the beauty of this earth and its stars. The sky is a portal to yugen. Sunrise, sunset, and a solar eclipse, they say, proffer the experience of encountering mystery. With all its great wisdom traditions, there is in Japan great respect for don't know. My friend and yoga teacher Rolf Gates writes of the gifts of not knowing. My first authentically spiritual practice was saying that I did not know. I became sober as a military officer, having spent the preceding years pretending to know everything. Despite the fact that I was the only person who believed me, I persisted in my know-it-allness right up until I landed in rehab. Rehab takes the know-it-all right out of you. While I was there, the world changed. And when I got back to my unit, we were at war. I was a military officer in a combat arms unit preparing for war, and I no longer knew everything. In fact, I didn't know anything. I was appalled. Just when my country needed me to have my act together, I was coming to the conclusion that I did not know a thing about life. Rolf Gates continues, what I found was that instead of being a liability, my new awareness was an asset. The truth was I had never known anything. My newfound cluelessness was actually the beginning of wisdom. Before, when I knew everything, I could not learn anything. I could not listen to anyone, and I could not be of real service to anybody. In the frantic weeks that my unit prepared for the Persian Gulf War, I was able to really listen to the men who depended on me, and when I answered their questions, it was with the truth. I realized that I had been carrying an immense load on my shoulders, having to know it all, and that without that weight, life was a great deal easier. The enormous amount of energy I had channeled into knowing it all could now be channeled into more productive behavior. I began to form relationships. I began to learn from others. I began to stand calmly amidst the chaos of life. As I emptied my cup, the world flowed in. Mystery loves company. I was in college when I first encountered William James' Varieties of Religious Experience. It has accompanied me on every move. Across the decades, my 17 or maybe 18-year-old self speaks to me from its pages through my penciled marginalia and underlining. In Lecture 3, The Reality of the Unseen, James writes, I remember the night and almost the very spot on the hilltop where my soul opened out, as it were, into the infinite. And there was a rushing together of the two worlds, the inner and the outer, Echoing Psalm 42, he continues, "It was deep, calling unto deep, the deep that my own struggle had opened up within, being answered by the unfathomable deep without, reaching beyond the stars." Much more recently, browsing in the heaven of a used bookstore, next to his international bestseller Einstein's Dreams was physicist Alan Lightman's Searching for Stars on an Island in Maine. I opened it, and the James passage left off the page. Across a century, here is Alan Lightman calling out to William James and us. It's a clear summer night, and we've been sitting on our dock at Lute Island looking up at the stars. Overhead, the white sash of the galaxy sweeps over the sky. And I feel myself falling into its depths. I am falling, and I am surrounded on all sides by the stars. I am beyond the Milky Way. In the distance, I see other galaxies, glowing spirals and pinwheels and elliptical blobs, each containing billions of stars. And I myself have grown larger. I am a giant striding through the dark halls of the cosmos. But the universe is always larger. Space goes on and on and on. I am dizzy with infinity. Then I grow smaller. I am shrinking. Eventually, I find myself back in my home galaxy, hurtling toward a particular star, then toward a particular planet, then toward the dappled brown coast of a landmass on that planet, and finally, I am sitting on a wooden dock by the sea. In the company of stars, all of us are mystics. Mystery loves company. This is American singer-songwriter Iris DeMent, "Let the Mystery Be." Everybody is wondering what and where they all come from. Everybody is worrying about where they're going to go when the whole thing's done. But no one knows for certain, and so it's all the same to me. I think I'll just let the mystery be. Some say once you're gone forever, and some say you're going to come back. Some say you rest in the arms of a Savior if in sinful ways you lack. Some say they're coming back in a garden, bunch of carrots and little sweet peas. I think I'll just let the mystery be. Some say they're going to a place called glory. I'm not saying it's not a fact, but I've heard I'm on the road to purgatory, and I don't like the sound of that. I believe in love, and I live my life accordingly. But I choose to let the mystery be. I think I'll just let the mystery be. I said I wasn't talking about believing or not believing in a God or gods, but talking about mystery does beg the question, doesn't it? Speaking of Einstein, I'm going to give this one to him. When asked about God, the German-American physicist replied, "The problem involved is too vast for our limited minds. We are in the position of a little child entering a huge library filled with books in many languages. The child knows someone must have written those books. They do not know how. They do not understand the languages in which they are written. The child dimly suspects a mysterious order in the arrangements of the books, but they don't know what it is. That, it seems to me," he said, "is the attitude of even the most intelligent human being toward God. We see the universe marvelously arranged and obeying certain laws, but only dimly understand these laws. With his signature curiosity, originality, genius, and fearlessness, Albert Einstein exhorted us to embrace the unknown and cherish a childlike sense of wonder and awe. The most beautiful thing we can experience, he said, is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. Let's talk about awe. Up until about 15 years ago, scientists were studying emotions essential to human survival, like fear and disgust, but they were basically uninterested in awe. They knew that throughout the span of evolution, we've met our most basic needs, not individually, but socially. We've survived according to our capacity to cooperate, form communities, and create culture that strengthens our sense of shared identities. Then came the realization that the provenance of so much that is human, music, art, religion, science, politics, binds us together with awe, a scientific aha. Awe is still very much an elusive emotion, but we do know now that it transforms our bodies and our brains. It is awe that cools our immune system's inflammation response, sharpens our reasoning, and orients us toward big ideas and new insights. Awe, the feeling of being in the presence of something vast that transcends our understanding, is a transformational, vital force in our lives. American film director Steven Spielberg was asked, "What was awe like for you as a child?" Echoing James and Lightman, Spielberg recalled that one night his father gathered him up and hustled him into the car. They went to a field and lay on their backs on blankets. A meteor shower washed over the sky. He remembers the light, the profusion of stars, the vastness of the night sky, and his experiments with seeing fleeting patterns of stellar awe. It was this wonder of life, he says, that I hoped to give to others in E.T. And then he says this: we are all equal in awe. In 2022, Dacher Keltner, a professor of psychology at UC Berkeley and the director of their Greater Good Science Center, published the book, Awe. In the course of their research, he and Professor Yongbai gathered stories of awe from people in 26 countries. He says, we cast our net broadly because of the scientific concern about weird samples. What are weird samples? This is hilarious. That's weird, spelled out all in caps, which are those comprised disproportionately of people who are, here comes the acronym, Western, educated, individualist, rich, and democratic. Weird. Adjusting for weird, they received 2,600 narratives by speakers of 20 languages. And what was the largest common denominator that led people to feel awe? Do you want to guess? All around the world. What was it? Birth? Death? Love? Nature? Music? No. What leads us most often to feel awe is other people's courage, kindness, strength, or overcoming. One day in the mid-1980s, I was doing what I did for most of a decade, sitting with a parishioner as he lay dying. This was the worst of the AIDS years, and since no one knew how it was spreading, and I was burying as many as 3 people a week, we all assumed we would be dead. On that particular day, it was Rogers Baker. I adored him. I was devastated. Rogers was curious. "If I possibly can," he said, "when I die, I'm going to give you a sign that everything's okay." I wasn't thinking of that as his breathing slowed and finally stopped. I was thinking that his suffering was over, remembering that there had been exactly 1 day over the past few months when he had felt well enough to be up and out. He had spent it buying gifts for everyone he loved. Just then, the room was filled with a kind of warm presence. I'm not sure how to describe this. It was peaceful. Maybe if you could feel light, it felt like that. I didn't say anything. I knew it might be one more strange byproduct of exhaustion and unremitting grief. But from the other side of Roger's bed, his partner, Preston Babbitt, looked at me wide-eyed and said, "Do you feel that?" I did. Preston said, "He's still here. He's comforting us." He would. And my heart opened to an almost physical experience of grace. Opened to mystery. The feeling lingered for perhaps 20 minutes or more. We had no sense of time, but as it dissipated, at the very moment the room became the room again, for the second time that afternoon, Preston said, "He's gone." The last sense of Roger's physical presence was gone, leaving behind nothing but his spent body and 2 people who had loved him deeply, deeply reassured that somehow he was okay. Who knows what we felt that day? Of course we wanted it to be our sign from Rogers, and maybe it was just the angle of the sun coming through the windows or the cranky old radiator or our longing playing a trick on us. It doesn't matter. And that's the point. That day, at the hour of death, we were companioned by mystery. And I will tell you, for what it's worth, that I have been companioned by mystery countless times since. Mystery loves company. Mostly, I don't tell these stories. They're not a good way to make Unitarian Universalist friends. I found that out the hard way when I attended the first day of a chapter retreat, craving the steadying presence of colleagues, though I didn't dare stay overnight. Too many young men were too close to death. We began with a check-in. When it was my turn to speak, I reported that AIDS was both destroying and creating our community, that the congregation was experiencing an extraordinary sense of spiritual awake and aliveness, that I was both exhausted and exalted. I added that there were days when the veil between the living and the dead felt translucent, almost diaphanous to me. Afterwards, I was approached by an older minister whom I liked very much. I want to preface his comments by saying that he was nothing but welcoming and kind to me before and after. But that day my comments about death had upset him and concerned him. These are his exact words. "I would have expected more from you." He believed that the plague had infected my theology. I wasn't hurt by his reprimand. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of compassion for him. As he tried to talk sense into me, his fear of death was palpable. And that fear was helpful, instructive, because in that moment, it was crystal clear to me that making room for what cannot be rationally explained is both necessary and courageous. I was lucky to learn this early in my ministry. Setting a place at the table for mystery is good for our souls and good for our faith tradition. Recently, I was speaking to a doula, a woman trained in childbirth, who accompanies those who are giving birth toward the end of an empowering and, she said, spiritual birthing experience. Her eyes lit up as she described her work, engaging with the arrival of new life live from the very front row. And then she trained as a death doula, helping to companion people through dying until the final release. She said, "It's the same thing. I welcome them from the mystery. I send them back into the mystery. It's the same mystery. And that mystery is our home." What would it mean to make our home in mystery? Mystery above, mystery below, mystery all around. Reverend Jan Richardson again. "I know what it means to give ourselves to the company of mystery and those who can help us navigate it, those who bear witness when our lives travel far beyond anything we can understand, those who help us live into the mysteries that unfold over time, those who help us recognize and celebrate clarity when it comes, those who know our hearts are made whole, not so much by certainties, but by the love that carries us and connects us through it all." Why would we ever be afraid? In Jan Wagner's one-woman show, The Search for Signs of Intelligent Life in the Universe, Lily Tomlin starred as Trudy, an elderly woman who walks the avenues of Manhattan carrying all her worldly goods in a couple of plastic grocery bags, while carrying on a loud dialogue with an invisible group of visitors from outer space whom she calls her space chums. As their guide and interpreter of the strange ways of the human species and the vagaries of human culture, Trudy is constantly holding up a can of Campbell's soup in one hand and the famous Andy Warhol painting of a can of Campbell's soup in the other hand, trying to convince to the extraterrestrials and to convey to them the difference between soup and art. "This is soup," she keeps repeating. "This is art. Soup, art." They fail to grasp the difference. The other thing Trudy wants them to understand is the enigma of human emotional response. How would you explain goosebumps? More importantly, how would you bring someone to experience that curious combination of awe and dreadful wonder that causes our hair to stand on end? Trudy decides to take her space chums to the theater for their final evening on Earth, hoping for goosebumps. In the very last scene, Trudy stands alone on the stage. Her chums have left behind a note which she reads aloud. "Dear Trudy, Thanks for making our stay here so jam-packed and fun-filled. What we take into space with us that we cherish the most is goosebumps. Did I tell you what happened at the play? Asked Trudy. We're in the back of the theater, standing there in the dark. All of a sudden, I feel one of them tug at my sleeve, whispers, "Trudy, look." I say, "Yeah, goosebumps. You definitely got goosebumps. You really like the play that much?" They said it wasn't the play that gave them goosebumps. It was the audience. I forgot to tell them to watch the play. They've been watching the audience. Yeah, to see a group of strangers sitting together in the dark, laughing and crying about the same things, that just knocked them out. They said, "Trudy, the play was soup. The audience, art." In the early 1990s, my friend John McDarr went to see the show when it was on Broadway. He was seated next to a stranger, and not surprisingly, in typical Northeast fashion, they had not greeted each other. The play was almost over. "I like to think of them out there in the dark," says Trudy. "Sometimes we'll do something and they'll laugh. Sometimes we'll do something and they'll cry. And maybe one day we'll do something so magnificent, everyone in the universe will get goosebumps." At just that moment, Trudy turns around to face the back of the bare gray stage wall and throws her arms wide open. Suddenly, the wall becomes an inky black, sparkling with thousands of stars. The audience surged to its feet. John McDarr found himself both laughing and crying. And then, he says, for the first time that evening, I became aware of the stranger to my left, who was also on his feet, engulfed in the same emotion. Spontaneously, we threw our arms around each other and hugged. Beloved spiritual companions, thank you for keeping me such good company in the mystery. I love you. Amen.
Please welcome this year's respondent, Reverend Lauren Smith.
There is a river of grace flowing into and through our lives. We gather at the banks of that river for consolation, for inspiration, and to feel again our connection to something bigger than ourselves, whose name we do not know. I've been listening to Kim Crawford Harvie tell stories for more than 25 years. She's my minister, my teacher, my colleague, and my friend. Kim's ministry and her stories have shaped and blessed my life. And it's an honor beyond words to be asked to offer this response today. It's an honor to be here virtually with all of you. Kim writes about a near-death experience she had as a young woman, and I can just see her swinging out over that waterfall. I can imagine the green branch snapping and the subsequent tumble. It's also easy to imagine her, shattered and jubilant, gobsmacked by beauty and grateful to be alive. I know Kim is telling the truth when she says, "That feeling never left me." I know she's telling the truth because that feeling was present in every sermon I have ever heard her give. There was always some moment, or more than one, of awe-inducing, mysterious encounter. Goosebumps were often the tell, and a feeling of release and relief. Whether the story being shared was poignant or hilarious, we in the congregation were met by that ministry. We experienced it together. Mystery loves company. The Reverend A. Powell Davies once said that arguing about the existence of God is like arguing about the existence of water in the presence of a waterfall. He said that instead of arguing, he would prefer to take a person for a walk near the falls and let them feel the spray. I don't believe in God, but I do experience God regularly. I listen for God's voice in the world, and I try to attune my life to that voice. In truth, the word God often feels like inadequate shorthand, overly laden with millennia of associations. I prefer the chosen language of the poet Dylan Thomas, who wrote about the force that through the green pews drives the flower, the force that drives my green age. Mostly, though, I don't worry about names. Mostly, I prefer to let the mystery be. During my first few years at Arlington Street, Kim often shared stories about her ministry in Provincetown. She told us about the week when a whole pew of beloved congregants disappeared from the sanctuary. She told us about officiating at yet another memorial service one weekend, then retreating with the congregation to the beach at night to lay out on the blankets and look at the stars. I remember she said that in those years, the world outside of Provincetown hardly felt real. The circumstances about which Kim spoke were a horror. The suffering at the height of the AIDS crisis was unfathomable. But I appreciated hearing about days of ministry when the veil between the living and the dead felt translucent, diaphanous, to use Kim's words. I'm filled by the kind of ministry that is forged at the meeting place between life and death, between grace and great suffering. My paternal grandparents sometimes took my brother and me to church when I was little. They were pillars of a small Black United Methodist congregation about a half a mile from their house. In worship services there, I could feel the spirit move. As I grew up, I discovered that the dogma didn't fit, but the theology expressed by the rhythms of worship fed my soul. The way the congregation participated in the sermon so that it became a collective experience, the way the hymns hushed or expanded. There is an aliveness, a presence in some religious services that is spiritually necessary for communities under siege. The service says, "You are here. I am here. I am with you. You matter. You belong." There is a river of grace running into and through our lives. We gather at the banks of that river and receive blessing. Theologian Paul Tillich writes, "Grace strikes us when we are in great pain and restlessness. It strikes us when we walk through the dark valley of a meaningless and empty life. It strikes us when we feel that our separation is deeper than usual. Sometimes at such a moment, a wave of light breaks into our darkness, and it is as though a voice were saying, you are accepted. You are accepted, accepted by that which you do not know. Do not ask for the name now. Perhaps you will find it later. Do not try to do anything now. Perhaps later you will do much. Do not seek for anything. Do not perform anything. Do not intend anything. Simply accept that you are accepted. If that happens to us," he says, "we experience grace. After such an experience, we may not be better than before, and we may not believe more than before, but everything is transformed." Last month, I went to the Museum of African American Culture and History for the first time. I was there with my dear friend and colleague, Vale Weller, and members of the UUA's President's Council. Just before we left, we stopped in at the Reflecting Pool, which, if you've ever been there, is breathtaking. The Reflecting Pool is in a large square room with dark walls that extend through the upper stories of the museum. Each wall contains a quote in gold lettering. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King is there, echoing the words of Amos. "We are determined to work and fight until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream." Francis Ellen Watkins Harper is there. "I ask no monument proud and high to arrest the gaze of passers-by. All that my yearning spirit craves is, bury me not in a land of slaves." Nelson Mandela graces a wall. "I cherish my own freedom dearly. but I care even more for your freedom. And Sam Cooke gets the last word. A change is gonna come. There's a circular window at the top of the room that lets in light and from which a ring of water falls. The falling water sparkles in the air and smacks into the reflecting pool below. It is vibrant and loud. The falling water arrives continuously and vociferously, a beautiful and unceasing benediction. In that space, I feel again the blessings of those who have gone before me, who made a way for me. And the water just keeps coming, continually arriving to meet me just where I am, from across the centuries, a powerful gift of the ancestors who bless us with their aliveness across the veil of death. I love the late essayist June Jordan. She's one of my favorite thinkers, insightful, down to earth, and wickedly intelligent. Many years ago, I encountered an essay of hers called The Difficult Miracle of Black Poetry in America. It was about Phillis Wheatley, the first published African-American poet, and it took up the dilemma raised by the psalmist over 2 millennia ago. The wicked have carried us away to captivity and required of us a song. How can we sing our holy song in a strange land? The essay begins. It was not natural, and she was the first. Come from a country of many tongues, torn by rupture, by theft, by travel like mismatched clothing, packed down into the cargo of evil ships sailing irreversible into slavery. Come to a country to be docile and dumb, to be big and breeding, to be turkey, horse, cow, to be cook, carpenter, plow, to live forcibly illiterate, forcibly itinerant, to be 3/5 of a human being at best, to be this valuable, this hated thing among strangers who purchased your life and then cursed it unceasingly, to be a slave. Come to this country to be a slave, and how should you sing? How could you, belonging to no one but property to those, despising the smiles of your soul, how could you dare to create yourself a poet? The girl who would become Phillis Wheatley was brought to the United States from the shores of Africa and put up for auction at the tender age of 7. She was purchased by Susanna and John Wheatley, and her first poem, which she wrote at the age of 14, was published in 1768. Phillis was dropped as a child into a social structure systematically designed to annihilate Black personhood, stripped of her name, her family, her language, and so much more. And yet she emerged an artist. This is the difficult miracle of her existence. I have been captivated by this miracle and this mystery for much of my life. The mystery of what writer Zora Neale Hurston called the secret of Black song and laughter. Song and laughter that seem to emerge out of the vibrant, whole, unbroken soul of Black people against all odds, century after century. This mystery, this difficult miracle, is at the heart of my faith. It animates my practice of Unitarian Universalism and Zen Buddhism, and my deep appreciation for liberal Christianity. Each of these traditions teaches in different ways that there is a wholeness and freedom singing at the heart of everything, to which each of us is heir. I choose not to worry that mystery or overanalyze it. Singer Billy Bragg once wrote, "The temptation to take the precious things in life apart to see how they work must be resisted, for they never fit together again." There is a part of me, to be honest, that's like Thomas in the famous painting by Caravaggio, tempted to poke a finger into the wound of a patient Christ. More often, though, I can accept Albert Einstein's exhortation to, as Kim put it, embrace the unknown and cherish a childlike sense of wonder and awe. The most beautiful thing we can experience, Kim wrote, quoting Einstein, is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. The mysterious may well be a source of courage, too, and the will to live whole, alive, and free. Kim said, setting a place at the table for mystery is good for our souls and good for our faith tradition. I say, setting a place at the table for mystery is also good for the world. Openness to the unknown is a pathway to liberation and wholeness for all people. The mystery speaks to us of freedom. I think of my great-grandparents and their families. They were Black men and women living in North Carolina in the waning days of slavery, the pressure cooker years before the start of the Civil War. They were free Black people, but their freedom was circumscribed by law and circumstance. Their relative freedom depended on the passes they carried and the whims of the white people among whom they lived. They could be re-enslaved for modest infractions, real or manufactured. They lived on a knife's edge. And this was the only reality they had ever known, the only place they had ever lived. The world beyond Wilmington must have felt like a great dark void, like the edge of the earth on world maps drawn before people discovered that the earth was round. And yet, despite all this, they opened to a possibility of a different future. They packed up, they picked up, and they moved on. They made a treacherous journey north to Oberlin, Ohio, and then east to New England, where some of them became Unitarians. They set out for freedom, for a new life unlike anything they had ever known, and it was not perfect. Certainly, moving north of the Mason-Dixon line didn't mean full access to citizenship, but it did open new opportunities for them, and they chose to move through those new doors of opportunity. I am the beneficiary of my ancestors' imagination and courage. Their courage blesses my life. We who love religious community know something about facing the unknown. This is a perilous time for progressive faith communities. It's also a time pregnant with possibility. The religious landscape is changing. As we collectively grapple with this moment in Unitarian Universalism, I wish courage and imagination for all of us, and a faith that allows us to move out from the known world into something new. This moment will require us to lean on and support one another, as my forebears did on the road north. I work at our Unitarian Universalist Association. Know that I and we are here to help map a way forward together. Mystery loves company, and so much possible blessing lies ahead. Consider the courage of Fannie Lou Hamer, one of my most beloved heroes. She was born into a sharecropping family in Mississippi in 1917. Sharecropping was slavery light in many ways. Sharecroppers were not allowed to leave the plantations on which they worked without permission of the owners. There was an elaborate system of finance that bound families to the plantations through debt, and because they were forced to purchase food and supplies from owners at inflated prices. And while Black people technically enjoyed the rights of citizenship, there was a cultural prohibition against exercising those rights, backed up by the threat of extreme violence. This is how Fannie Lou Hamer grew up. It's all she knew. But from very early in her life, she was determined to get away. One day in 1962, she attended a mass meeting sponsored by SNCC, the Southern Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. SNCC organizers were encouraging Black people to register and vote. Mrs. Hamer says she never knew until that time that Black people could vote. 72% of the people in her area were Black, which meant that if Black people voted in large numbers, they could upend local power dynamics. When organizers asked who would go down to the courthouse to register, Mrs. Hamer volunteered. She went by bus with a group of people down to the courthouse and made her wishes known. Days later, she had to flee from her home with her family to the house of a friend. An attempt was made on her life there. She fled to a third location, but somehow an organizer tracked her down in a plantation shack. He walked in the door and found her sitting in a chair next to a wood stove. He said, "I'm looking for Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer." She rose from her chair, not yet knowing who he was, not knowing whether he was friend or foe. She stood up and said, "I'm Fannie Lou Hamer." In later years, she would endure threats and a brutal beating at the hands of police officers in Winona, Mississippi, that caused permanent damage to her internal organs. But after all that, she said, "From the time I began working, I never had a mind to stop. After that happened to me in Winona, I knew there wouldn't be anything to stop me except death." I heard her words in an old recorded interview. And when Mrs. Hamer said, "After that happened to me in Winona," I expected the sentence to end the way I might have ended it. I expected her to say, "I lost my faith," or "I had to retreat for a while," or "I didn't know if I could go on." But she said, "I knew there wouldn't be anything to stop me other than death." It is hard to fathom moral courage like that, or the will to live free that runs that deep. To me, it is a miracle. I live in the fruits of that miracle, blessed daily by her courage. You live in the fruits of that miracle. There is a river of grace running into and through our lives. We gather at the banks of that river in gratitude. Paul Tillich says to those of us struck by grace, "Do not do anything now. Perhaps later you will do much. Do not seek for anything. Do not perform anything. Do not intend anything. Simply accept." Such counsel feels dangerous in these days. We are living in a genocidal time, in a society systematically crafted to annihilate the personhood of many of our human siblings, trans and non-binary people, the people of Gaza, the list goes on. And the planet strains under the impact of human consumption. How can we possibly be still? We don't have to be still forever. We can't be still forever. But we do have to be still for a little while, receiving, replenishing, accepting with gratitude the gifts we have been given. The mystery is there in those powerful waters that keep arriving. The spiritual nourishment that allows us to move into the unknown, to act with generosity and courage for the liberation of all. There is a river of grace flowing into and through our lives. We gather at the banks of that river to feel alive. We gather to feel again our place in the web of life. I walked a stretch of the Camino de Santiago earlier this month with the Reverend Rob Hardies and a band of 22 Unitarian Universalists. We walked from the cathedral in Santiago de Compostela to Finisterre, the westernmost point in Spain, along the Costa de Morte, the coast of death. Finisterre was once considered the end of the world by the ancients, the Celtic pagans and the early Christians who lived in the region. It is wild and beautiful, with sheer headlands, dangerous rocks, roiling waters, which were placid when I arrived, and great clots of wildflowers buffeted by strong winds. A few of us walked out to the end of the point one evening to watch the sunset. In the quiet, Rob said, "I wonder what it was like for people hundreds of years ago who journeyed all the way here to the end of the world and discovered that it was beautiful." His words echo Kim's as she somersaulted over a waterfall in her young adulthood when she thought she was going to die. My last glimpse of earth. So beautiful. I don't wish for any of us that pain, but I do wish for each of us the experience of being gobsmacked, streaming with gratitude, drunk with awe at the vivid, pulsing beauty of the world, delirious with joy for another chance to wake up on this beautiful earth. The service at Arlington Street always ends the same way, with a benediction. Kim invites the congregation to put their hands in Namaste. The divine in me bows to the divine in you. She offers some chosen words and then says, "Let us keep this faith, beloveds, and pass it on. The service begins when the service ends. Bless your heart. I love you. Amen." And then the band and the congregation launch into Where You Go. I won't sing it, I'll spare you. But it goes, "Where you go, I will go, beloved. Where you go, I will go. For your people are my people. Your people are mine. Your people are my people. Your divine, my divine." It is pure joy to launch us back into the world, healed and restored. So this for my teacher, for Kim. Dear Kim, I bow to the divine in you. Thank you for your teaching. Thank you for countless experiences that left me gobsmacked, awestruck, grateful, and more alive. Where you go next, I won't follow. We who love you release you into the mystery of what's next. But I will keep this faith and pass it on. The service continues, the service ends, the service continues. Bless your heart. I love you. Amen.
On behalf of all members of the Berry Street Conference, thank you to our essayist, Crawford Harvie, and respondent, Lauren Smith. Thank you to outgoing committee member, Morrison Reed, and to continuing members, Aisha Ansano and Elizabeth Stevens, whose terms end in 2025 and 2026, respectively. I am excited to announce that Reverend Eric Cherry will be joining the Berry Street Essay Executive Committee for a 3-year term serving through 2027. And now it is my pleasure to announce that our 2025 Berry Street essayist will be Leela Sinha. And with that, I now call to a close the ministerial conference in Berry Street for 2024 and look forward to seeing you at next year's conference in Baltimore, Maryland. Go in faith.